I stood on the porch of the house I spent 32 years paying for, but my key would not turn. My son, James, looked through the window with a cold stare I did not recognize. He had tricked me into signing away my $550,000 home while I was recovering from surgery. He wanted my master bedroom for a luxury office. He wanted me gone. But James made a mistake. A massive mistake. He forgot that while he stole the house, I still owned the driveway and the water lines. I did not argue. I did not beg. Instead, I hired a crew to build a heavy iron fence across the only entrance. Then, I had the water main capped off tight. The silence of the neighborhood was broken by the sound of his guests screaming. Their expensive cars were trapped. The toilets would not flush. His luxury life vanished in a single afternoon. Before I explain how a simple property line destroyed his greed, I want to know something. Have you ever had to teach a hard lesson to someone you loved? Leave a comment and let me know which state you are listening from today. My name is Arthur. For most of my life, people just knew me as the man in the blue uniform. I spent exactly 32 years working for the United States Postal Service. To some, it might seem like just a job. But to me, it was a calling. Every single morning, long before the sun even thought about rising, I would pull on those thick wool socks and lace up my leather boots. I would adjust my cap and head out into the world. I walked thousands of miles in those boots. I walked through the heavy humidity of the summer, where the air felt like a wet blanket pressing against my chest. I walked through the biting winds of January, where the ice would crust over my eyebrows. But I never complained. Not once. You see, back then, we believed in something. We believed in the value of a day of hard work. We believed that if you kept your head down and did your duty, the world would treat you fairly. Every house on my route was a story. I saw children grow up. I delivered college acceptance letters. I delivered wedding invitations. And occasionally I delivered the sad news that a loved one had passed away. But my favorite house was always the one at the end of my day. My house. My home. It is a beautiful colonial-style home with a wide front porch and a yard that I kept perfectly manicured. I remember the day my wife, Martha, and I signed the original papers. That was back in the late 80s. The mortgage seemed like a mountain we would never finish climbing. But we took it one step at a time. One paycheck at a time. I remember coming home with my shoulder aching from the heavy leather mailbag. My back would be stiff and my feet would feel like lead. But then I would look up and see the light in the window. I would see my son James playing in the driveway. It made every mile worth it. The proudest moment of my entire life happened about 5 years ago. I sat down at the kitchen table with a pen in my hand. I wrote out a check for the final balance. It was a massive number. Our home was finally valued at $550,000. And that day, it was officially mine. 100% mine. I felt like I had finally captured the American dream. I had built a fortress for my family. I had a roof that was paid for, a garden that was blooming, and a sense of security that no one could ever take away. Or so I thought. I used to sit on that porch and look at the street, thinking about all the years of service I had given to my community. I felt respected. I felt like a king in my own small kingdom. I had worked 30 years on those cold, hard streets so that I could spend my final years in peace. I thought my son looked at me with that same pride. I thought he understood the sacrifice. But looking back now, I realize he wasn't looking at my hard work. He was only looking at the house. He was looking at the $550,000 of equity that he didn't have to work for. The house felt very quiet after Martha passed away. It was a heavy kind of silence. It was the kind of silence that makes you notice every little creak in the floorboards and every hum of the refrigerator. I spent many evenings sitting in my recliner, looking at the empty hallway, and remembering when it was filled with the sound of running feet and laughter. So, when my son James called me and asked if he could come over for a serious talk, my heart actually lifted. I thought maybe he just missed his old man. James arrived with his wife Kimberly. They sat on the floral sofa that Martha had picked out 30 years ago. They looked nervous. James kept tapping his foot on the carpet, and Kimberly was fiddling with her wedding ring. Finally, James looked at me and explained their situation. The economy was tough. Rent for a decent apartment in the city had climbed to over $3,000 a month. They were struggling to save anything for a down payment on a home of their own. "Dad," James said to me, "we were wondering if we could move back home for a little while. Maybe a year or two. Just long enough to get our feet under us." I did not even have to think about it. Not for a single second. To me, that is what family is for. You provide a harbor when the storm gets too rough. I looked at James, and I saw the little boy who used to ask me to tuck him in. I looked at Kimberly and saw a young woman trying to build a life. I told them, "James, this is your home. It has always been your home. You do not even have to ask." I remember the feeling of pure joy I had that day. I felt like I had a purpose again. I spent the next 2 weeks cleaning out the guest rooms. I scrubbed the baseboards until my knees ached. I bought new pillows and soft towels. I wanted them to feel like they were staying at a 5-star hotel. I wanted them to feel loved. When they moved in, the house came alive again. There were boxes in the hallway and the smell of coffee in the morning. I loved it. I truly loved it. I would go to the grocery store and buy the expensive bacon that James liked. I would make sure the porch light was on if they stayed out late. In my mind, I was doing the most important work a father can do. I was protecting my cub. I was making sure that the $550,000 asset I had worked my whole life for was serving the people I loved most. I told them they did not have to worry about a utility bill. I told them to save every penny. "Put it in your savings account," I told them. "Build your future. I have everything I need right here." Kimberly would smile and thank me. She called me the best father-in-law in the world. James would pat me on the back and tell me how much they appreciated the help. It felt like the perfect arrangement. It felt like a reward for all those miles I walked as a mail carrier. I was surrounded by family. I was useful. I was happy. I thought we were building a stronger bond. I thought we were making memories that would last for the rest of my life. I never suspected that while I was opening my door, they were already looking for a way to lock it behind me. The first few months were wonderful, but slowly the air in the house began to change. It was subtle at first. It was like a shift in the wind before a summer storm. I started to notice that the things I did out of habit were suddenly seen as inconveniences. It started in the kitchen. I have always liked my morning routine. I get up at 6, I brew a pot of black coffee, and I read the local newspaper at the small breakfast table. But one morning, Kimberly came in and sighed very loudly. She told me that the smell of my coffee was too strong, and it was distracting her from her morning meditation. She said she needed zen in the house to start her business day. I apologized. I really did. I started making my coffee later, or I would take it out to the porch, even when the morning air was chilly. I did not want to be a burden. Then, there were the comments about the furniture. Kimberly started calling my home cluttered. She used words like outdated and dust collector. She told me that for her business to succeed, she needed to host high-value clients, and the floral patterns on the sofa were unprofessional. I remember sitting in my chair one evening, just trying to watch the evening news. James came in and asked if I could turn the volume down. Then he asked if I could maybe watch my shows in the basement instead. He said that Kimberly was on a very important strategy call and the sound of the news was breaking her flow. I felt a small pinch in my chest. I was sitting in the house I paid for. I was watching the television I bought. But suddenly, I felt like I was trespassing. The most painful part was the way they started talking about my room. My bedroom is the largest one in the house. It has a beautiful view of the backyard and the old oak tree that Martha and I planted. Kimberly started mentioning how that room had the best natural light for a home studio. She would walk past my door and talk about how much revenue they could generate if that space was used for productivity instead of just sleeping. I tried to laugh it off. I would say, "Well, I have to sleep somewhere, don't I?" But they would not laugh back. They would just share a look. A cold, knowing look that made my skin crawl. James started becoming distant. He stopped asking me about my day. He stopped talking about the old times. Every conversation became about efficiency and maximizing the property value. They started rearranging the kitchen cabinets without asking me. My favorite mugs were moved to the top shelf where I could barely reach them. My spices were thrown away because they were expired and took up too much visual space. I began to realize that I was no longer the owner of the house in their eyes. I was just an obstacle. I was a ghost from a past they wanted to erase. I was the clutter that Kimberly wanted to get rid of. I would lie in bed at night, listening to them whisper in the hallway. I could not hear the words, but I could hear the tone. It was sharp. It was impatient. I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself that young people just have a different way of doing things. I wanted so badly to believe in the love of my son. I kept telling myself that I was lucky to have them there. But the tension kept growing. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. The house that used to feel like a warm hug now felt like a cold waiting room. And I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was waiting for the moment they would finally say out loud what they were thinking in the dark. I remember the smell of that evening. It was a Tuesday. I had decided to cook a pot roast, thinking a nice family dinner might ease the tension that had been building in the house. I spent all afternoon searing the meat and chopping the carrots and potatoes. I wanted things to go back to the way they were when James was a boy. I wanted to feel like we were a family again. But when James and Kimberly sat down at the table, they did not reach for the serving spoons. They did not even look at the food. They just looked at each other. There was a coldness in the room that the steam from the roast could not warm up. James cleared his throat. He looked at his plate, not at me. He started using these strange corporate words that he never used to say. He talked about efficiency. He talked about the future of the brand. "Dad," James said, his voice flat and rehearsed. "We have been looking at the numbers. Kimberly's consulting business is ready to take the next step, but for that to happen, we need a dedicated professional environment. We need a space that reflects success." I nodded, trying to be supportive. "That sounds great, son. I am proud of you both." Then, the trap snapped shut. Kimberly leaned forward. Her eyes were sharp, like two pieces of flint. "Arthur," she said, "we have decided to turn your master suite into a luxury executive office and a man cave for James to host his partners. It is a productivity move. It is about optimizing the square footage of this property." I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at James. "My room? But that is my room. Your mother and I spent 30 years in that room. It is where I keep my things. It is my sanctuary." James finally looked up. But there was no love in his eyes. There was only a cold, hard ambition. "Dad, let's be realistic. You are one person. You do not need that much space. You would be much more comfortable in one of those new senior apartments across town. They have professional staff. They have organized activities. It is a better lifestyle move for everyone involved." I sat there, frozen. I looked at the pot roast I had spent 4 hours cooking. I realized then that they were not asking me. They were telling me. They were talking about me as if I were a piece of old furniture that no longer fit the decor. They were talking about optimizing my life out of my own home. "I am not moving," I said, my voice trembling. "I own this house. I worked 32 years for this house. I invited you here to help you, not to be pushed out." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard. Kimberly did not look angry. She looked bored. She looked like she was waiting for a child to finish a tantrum. James just went back to looking at his plate. The cruelty was not in their words. It was in their indifference. They did not care about my memories. They did not care about my sweat and my sacrifice. To them, I was just an obstacle in the way of their man cave. I was just a ghost haunting their executive office. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my bed, looking at the ceiling, telling myself that my son was just stressed. I told myself he would come to his senses in the morning. I truly believed that the law was on my side. I believed that because my name was on the deed, I was safe. The next morning, I confronted them in the kitchen. I had my jaw set firm. "James," I said, "I am sorry about the business, but I am not leaving my home. This house is my legacy. It is worth $550,000, and I intend to live here until the day I die." Kimberly poured herself a cup of expensive coffee. She did not even look at me. She just gave a small, chilling laugh. "Actually, Arthur," she said, "you should probably check your records." I looked at James. What is she talking about? James looked ashamed for a split second. But then his face hardened. "Dad, do you remember last year, when you had the surgery for your cataracts? You were so worried about who would make the medical decisions if something went wrong." My heart began to drum against my ribs. I remembered that day vividly. I was nervous about the anesthesia. I was struggling to read the fine print because my vision was so blurred. "I remember," I whispered. "I signed the medical power of attorney. I wanted you to be my voice if I could not speak for myself." Kimberly stepped closer. She pulled a folder from the counter. "You thought it was just medical papers, Arthur. But James had a lawyer draw up a quitclaim deed as well. You signed the entire property over to him as a gift. It was all legal. It was all notarized. The house is officially in James's name now." The world seemed to tilt. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I reached out for the kitchen counter to keep from falling. "You lied to me," I said. I was blind. I could not see what I was signing. "You told me it was for my health." "It was for the health of the family estate," Kimberly interjected. "It was a strategic transfer of assets. And since James is now the sole owner of this $550,000 property, he has every right to decide who lives here." James finally spoke, but he did not look at me. "We have already started the process of changing the locks, Dad. We have a locksmith coming on Friday. We have already rented a small studio apartment for you on the other side of the city. Your things will be moved there by the weekend." I looked at my son. I looked at the boy I had carried on my shoulders. I looked at the man I had taught to ride a bike on the very driveway he was now stealing from me. The betrayal was so deep, so absolute, that I could not even find the words to scream. They had used my vulnerability against me. They had turned my trust into a weapon. They had stood by my hospital bed and planned my eviction. I realized in that moment that I did not know this man. My son was gone. In his place was a stranger who valued a man cave more than his father's soul. I was being discarded. I was being thrown away like a piece of trash after a lifetime of service. And the worst part was, they had made it perfectly legal. Or so they thought. I was given 7 days. Just 7 days to pack up 32 years of memories into brown cardboard boxes. It is a strange thing to have to decide what part of your life is worth keeping and what part is just clutter. James and Kimberly did not help. They did not offer to carry a single box. Instead, they stood in the hallway with clipboards, watching me. They were already measuring the walls for their new paint colors. They were already talking about where the executive desk would go. I remember folding my old USPS uniforms. I smoothed out the fabric with my hands. I thought about every mile I walked to pay for the roof over their heads. I packed the framed photo of Martha on our wedding day. I packed the silver watch the post office gave me when I retired. Everything else had to stay. I could not fit my life into a one-room studio apartment. The day I left was raining. It felt like the sky was mourning with me. I loaded my old sedan until the back seat was full. I looked back at the house one last time. The house I had painted myself. The house where I had celebrated every Christmas and every birthday. James did not even come out to say goodbye. He just stood behind the glass of the window, his arms crossed, waiting for me to pull out of the driveway. My new home was a studio apartment on the north side of town. The rent was $1,500 a month. It was located above a noisy laundromat. The walls were thin. I could hear the neighbors arguing, and the constant hum of the washing machines downstairs. The air smelled like old tobacco and cheap cleaning chemicals. I sat on the edge of my twin bed that first night. My boxes were stacked all around me. I felt like a stranger in my own skin. I was 70 years old, and I was starting over in a room that was smaller than my old garage. The silence was the worst part. It was not the peaceful silence of my home. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of being forgotten. I felt a bitterness in my throat that I could not swallow. I had spent my life being a good man. I had been a loyal husband and a devoted father. And this was my reward. A tiny room, a broken heart, and a son who had stolen my dignity for a man cave. I cried that night. I cried for Martha. I cried for the life I thought I had. But most of all, I cried because I realized that I had raised a man who had no soul. For the first month in that tiny apartment, I was a ghost. I barely ate. I barely slept. But then, one afternoon, I opened a box that I had nearly thrown away. It was a blue plastic bin that belonged to Martha. Martha was a very cautious woman. She grew up in a time when you did not trust the banks or the government without seeing the paperwork yourself. She kept every receipt. She kept every deed. She used to say, "Arthur, you have a heart of gold, but you have a head for stories, not for fine print. Leave the filing to me." I started going through her old folders. I found the original purchase agreement from 30 years ago. I found the tax records for the $550,000 property. And then I found a yellow envelope that was sealed with wax. Inside that envelope was a separate survey map. I sat at my small kitchen table and studied it under a bright lamp. My heart began to race. I felt a spark of something I had not felt in weeks. Hope. You see, our property was unique. When we bought it, the house was on a small, narrow lot. But the land around it, the large garden, and the private driveway were part of a second parcel. Martha had insisted on keeping them separate. She wanted to make sure that if we ever faced a lawsuit or a financial crisis, we would have options. I looked at the legal description. I read it over and over again. I wanted to be absolutely sure. The quitclaim deed that James had tricked me into signing only covered Parcel A. Parcel A was the house itself and the small footprint it sat on. But Parcel B? Parcel B was still mine. I owned the entire driveway that led to the garage. I owned the side yard, where the luxury office windows looked out. And most importantly, I owned the small strip of land where the main water line entered the property. I realized that James and Kimberly had been so greedy, so rushed to steal the house, that they had not checked the property lines. They had assumed that the house and the land were one and the same. They had assumed that because they had the keys to the front door, they owned everything. I sat back in my chair and laughed. It was a dry, ragged sound, but it was the first time I had laughed in a long time. I looked at the map again. My son had the house. He had the man cave. He had the executive office. But I had the water. And I had the road. I realized then that Martha was still taking care of me, even from the other side. She had left me a gift that was more valuable than any house. She had left me the power to fight back. I spent the rest of the night making a list. I did not need a lawyer yet. I just needed a plan. James wanted to treat our relationship like a business transaction. He wanted to talk about productivity and lifestyle moves. Fine. I decided right then that I was going to give him a lesson in property management that he would never forget. In the weeks that followed my eviction, I became a student of patience. In my old life as a mail carrier, I learned that timing is everything. You do not rush the route. You do not skip the houses. You simply keep moving forward, one step at a time. I took that same philosophy and applied it to my exile. I lived in that cramped studio apartment, but I did not let my mind stay there. Every morning I would sit by the window and map out my plan. I decided not to call a lawyer immediately. I knew that if I sued them for the house right away, they would find a way to stall. They would tie me up in court for years until I ran out of breath or money. No, I needed them to feel secure. I needed them to believe that they had won a total victory. I wanted them to be so confident that they would be willing to gamble everything they had. And that is exactly what they did. I started taking long drives back to my old neighborhood. I would park my old sedan 2 blocks away and walk past my house, keeping my head down. I felt like a stranger in my own life. I saw the contractors arrive every morning at 8 o'clock sharp. I saw the expensive vans with logos for custom cabinetry and high-end audio systems. I kept a small notebook in my pocket. Every time I saw a new delivery, I would write it down. I saw a truck from a luxury furniture store drop off a sofa that probably cost more than my first car. I saw crates of Italian marble being carried through the front door. I saw a team of electricians installing specialized lighting for what James called his executive suite. I did some research online at the public library. Based on the brands I saw and the number of workers, I estimated that they were spending a fortune. They were Vung Tien. That is a word my father used to use. It means throwing money around as if it will never run out. I calculated that they were spending at least $75,000 on these renovations. $75,000. They were using every penny of their savings. They were likely taking out personal loans too. They were betting their entire financial future on a house they had stolen from me. They were turning my comfortable family home into a cold, modern palace. They ripped out the carpets that Martha had chosen with such care. They painted over the warm wood trim that I had polished for 30 years. It hurt to watch. It truly did. It felt like they were erasing my existence. But every time I felt a tear sting my eye, I would reach into my pocket and touch the survey map of Parcel B. I would remind myself that they were building their castle on a foundation of sand. They thought they were optimizing the property. They thought they were being smart business people. But they were so blinded by their own greed that they forgot to check the boundaries of their kingdom. They never realized that the very driveway the contractors were using was still mine. They never realized that the water they used to mix their mortar and clean their marble floors was flowing through a pipe that sat on my land. I stayed silent. I did not send a single angry text message. I did not leave a single voicemail. I let them enjoy their victory. I let them believe that their old man was defeated and broken in a tiny apartment. I watched as they turned my house into a luxury paradise, knowing that I held the keys to the world outside their front door. The invitation did not come to me, of course. I found out about the grand opening party through a neighbor who still felt sorry for me. She told me that James and Kimberly were throwing a massive bash to show off the new renovations. They called it an executive open house. They wanted to impress James's partners and Kimberly's high-value clients. They wanted to show the world that they had arrived. The party was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in June. I arrived in the neighborhood early. I sat in my car, hidden behind a row of tall hedges, and watched the circus begin. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining, and the air was warm. Around 2 o'clock, the cars started to arrive. These were not the kind of cars you usually see in our modest neighborhood. I saw shiny German SUVs. I saw Italian sports cars that growled as they turned the corner. I saw men in tailored suits and women in dresses that cost more than my monthly rent. They all pulled into my driveway. They parked their expensive vehicles on the land that Martha had fought to keep separate. They walked across my grass, laughing and holding glasses of expensive wine. I saw James standing on the front porch. He was wearing a new suit. He looked expensive. He looked proud. He was shaking hands and pointing at the house, probably telling everyone about his brilliant real estate move. I saw Kimberly floating through the crowd, her smile as bright and as fake as a diamond. From my hiding spot, I could see through the windows. The house looked like a magazine cover. The man cave was finished. I could see the glow of massive television screens and the dark wood of a custom bar. It was a monument to their ego. It was a temple built with stolen stones. I waited until the party was at its peak. I waited until the driveway was completely packed with luxury cars, bumper to bumper. I waited until the music was loud and the guests were enjoying the catering. That was when I made my move. I did not go to the front door. I did not make a scene. Instead, I met my own team at the edge of the property. I had hired a fencing contractor and a master plumber. I had the legal documents in my hand, clearly showing that I was the sole owner of Parcel B. "Is everything ready?" I asked. The contractor nodded. He had a truck full of heavy-duty wrought iron fence sections. The plumber had his tools ready to cap the main water line. "Start with the driveway," I said, "and make sure that fence is anchored deep." I watched as they began to work. The sound of the power tools was drowned out by the music coming from the house. No one inside noticed a thing. They were too busy admiring the marble counters and the executive office. They were too busy celebrating their productivity. I felt a strange sense of calm. I was not acting out of anger. I was acting out of justice. James had told me that his move was about lifestyle and optimization. Well, now it was my turn to optimize my land. I was simply reclaiming what was mine. As the first iron post was driven into the ground, I looked at the house one last time. I thought about the 32 years I spent delivering mail. I thought about the cold winters and the blistering summers. I thought about the respect I had earned through honest work. James and Kimberly thought they could bypass the rules of life. They thought they could take a shortcut to success by trampling over their own father. But they were about to learn that you cannot have a home without a foundation of respect. And you certainly cannot have a luxury lifestyle when you do not own the road you park on or the water you drink. The party was about to end, and the real lesson was about to begin. The sun was high in the sky when the work began. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon. Inside my old house, the music was thumping. I could hear the muffled sounds of laughter and the clinking of expensive glass. My son and his wife were inside, celebrating their new life in a house they had stolen from me. They were surrounded by people who only cared about their success. They had no idea that the world outside was changing. I stood at the edge of the property, right where Parcel B began. I was standing on the land that still belonged to me. I had a crew of 4 men with me. They were professionals. They did not ask many questions when I showed them the legal land survey and the deed. I told them I needed a fence, and I needed it now. We started with the driveway. This was the only way in or out for a vehicle. Currently, there were 10 luxury cars parked neatly in a row inside the gate. There were shiny SUVs and sleek sports cars worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I watched as my crew unloaded heavy, black iron fence sections. These were not flimsy panels. They were solid. They were permanent. The sound of the jackhammer started. It was loud and rhythmic. It cut through the air like a drum. We began drilling deep holes into the concrete of the driveway, right at the property line. The guests inside probably thought it was just some nearby construction. They were too busy admiring the Italian marble and the new executive office to look out the front window. Within 2 hours, the iron curtain was up. We had bolted the fence sections into the ground. We had welded the joints. There was now a solid, 5-foot-tall iron barrier running directly across the driveway. The cars inside were trapped. They were not going anywhere. It was a strange sight to see. A line of beautiful cars, stuck behind a wall that had appeared out of nowhere. But I was not finished. While the fence crew was finishing, I walked over to the side of the yard with the plumber. We walked to the exact spot where the main water line crossed from my land into the house's lot. I had marked the spot with a small red flag earlier that week. "Do it," I said to the plumber. He didn't hesitate. He used a specialized tool to reach deep into the ground. He turned the heavy brass valve. Then, he cut the pipe and installed a permanent steel cap. He soldered it shut. It was a clean, professional job. Just like that, the lifeblood of the house was gone. No more water for the designer kitchen. No more water for the luxury master bathroom. No more water for the ice machines in the man cave. I sat down on a small folding chair on my side of the fence. I pulled a thermos of coffee from my bag and poured a cup. I felt a sense of peace that I had not felt since the day of my surgery. I was not being mean. I was not being petty. I was simply exercising my rights as a property owner. James had told me that his life was about optimization. He wanted to optimize his space. He wanted to optimize his career. Well, I was optimizing my land. I was protecting my investment. I looked at the house. It looked exactly the same from the outside. It looked like a $550,000 dream. But I knew the truth. Inside, the toilets would soon stop flushing. The sinks would run dry. The guests would get thirsty. And when they tried to leave, they would find their path blocked by an iron wall. The house had become a cage. A very expensive, very beautiful cage. And I was the one who held the key to the land it sat on. I took a sip of my coffee and waited for the music to stop. I knew it wouldn't be long now. The music stopped exactly 45 minutes after the water was capped. At first, there was a strange silence. Then, I heard the front door swing open. I heard voices. They were confused. They were frustrated. I saw guests coming out onto the porch, holding empty glasses. They were looking around, trying to figure out why the taps had gone dry. Then, someone noticed the fence. I saw James run down the front steps. He was still wearing his expensive suit jacket, but his face was turning a bright shade of red. He ran toward the driveway, stopping dead in his tracks when he saw the iron barrier. He looked at the fence. He looked at the luxury cars trapped behind it. Then, he looked at me. I was sitting just 10 feet away on the other side of the iron bars. I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast. James reached for his phone. His hands were shaking. A few seconds later, my own phone began to vibrate in my pocket. I let it ring for a few seconds. I wanted him to feel the weight of the silence. Then, I answered. "Dad!" James screamed. His voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "What the hell is going on? What is this fence? Why is there no water in the house? We have guests. We have people here." I took a slow breath. I kept my voice calm. I kept it steady. "Hello, James. I assume you are enjoying your grand opening." "Enjoying it?" he yelled. "People can't even use the bathroom. Kimberly is losing her mind. And the cars. Dad, there are 6-figure cars trapped in the driveway. Open the gate right now." "I'm afraid I can't do that, James," I said. "You see, I have decided to begin a private conservation project on my land. Parcel B is now a protected zone. That driveway is part of my private property. And as for the water, well, that line was an eyesore. It was cluttering up my land." "You can't do this," James roared. "It's illegal. I own this house." "You do own the house, James," I replied. "You stole it fair and square. You have the deed for the house. But as we discussed at dinner, I own the land around it. I own the driveway. I own the utility access. I am just making a lifestyle move. I am optimizing my land for my own use." I could hear Kimberly screaming in the background. She was yelling about her business reputation. She was yelling about lawsuits. I heard the guests starting to argue. Some of them were trying to figure out how to get their cars over the curb, but the curb was too high and the cars were too low. They were stuck. "Dad, please." James's voice changed. The anger was still there. But now, there was a note of panic. "Just let them leave. We can talk about this. Just turn the water back on for the party." "This is embarrassing. Respect is the foundation of any home, James," I said. "That is what I tried to tell you. But you wanted a man cave instead. You wanted an executive office. You thought you could treat your own father like a piece of unwanted clutter. Well, now you have the house all to yourself. It is very quiet. It is very private. It is exactly what you asked for." "I will call the police," he threatened. "Go ahead," I said. "I have the sheriff's office on speed dial. I have already shown them the deeds and the survey. They told me that as long as I stay on my land, I am well within my rights. This is a civil matter, James, and civil matters take a very long time to resolve in court." I hung up the phone. I watched as the guests began to leave on foot. They had to climb over the fence or walk through the bushes. They looked angry. They looked embarrassed. They left their beautiful cars behind in the driveway. The executive open house was a total disaster. James stayed by the fence for a long time. He looked through the bars at me, his face pale. He realized then that he had a house worth $550,000 that was now worth zero. Without water, and without a way to get a car to the garage, the house was legally uninhabitable. He had invested $75,000 into a luxury prison. I stood up, folded my chair, and walked back to my car. I didn't look back. For the first time in months, I felt like the man who had walked 32 years for the USPS. I felt like a man who knew the value of a home. James had the house, but I had the power, and I was going to make sure he learned exactly what it felt like to be unwanted in the place you call home. The months that followed the grand opening disaster were a slow and painful collapse for James and Kimberly. They had built their entire future on a foundation of lies and stolen property. They had assumed that because they had the house, they had the power. But a house is just a box of wood and stone if you cannot get to it, and if you cannot get water into it. James tried to fight me. He hired a high-priced lawyer from the city to sue me for what is called an easement by necessity. He claimed that I was illegally blocking his access to his own home. But my lawyer was better. My lawyer was a man I had known for 30 years. He knew the history of the land. He knew that the land had been deeded separately for a reason. In the eyes of the law, James had received the house as a gift. And when you receive a gift, you receive it as it is. He had not done his due diligence. He had not checked the property lines before he signed the papers. The court battles dragged on for months. Every time James went to court, it cost him thousands of dollars. He was burning through the last of his savings. Without water, the house was red-tagged by the city building inspectors. It was declared uninhabitable. James and Kimberly could not live there. They had to rent an expensive furnished apartment while they fought me in court. They were paying a mortgage, property taxes, and rent all at the same time. Plus, the legal fees were mounting. I watched from a distance as their empire began to crumble. Kimberly's consulting business, the one she needed the luxury office for, never took off. Her high-value clients did not want to work with someone who was involved in a messy, public legal battle with her father-in-law. Her reputation was tarnished. She was no longer the successful entrepreneur. She was just a woman who had helped trick an old man. The tension between them became a poison. When the money started to run out, the love started to vanish. That is the thing about people who value status over soul. When the status is gone, they have nothing left to hold on to. By the end of the year, the bank was calling. James had spent $75,000 on renovations and thousands more on lawyers. He stopped being able to pay the property taxes. He stopped being able to pay the insurance. The bank began the process of foreclosure. Then came the final blow. Kimberly packed her bags and left. She did not want to be part of a sinking ship. She told James that he was a loser who could not even steal a house correctly. She moved back to her parents' home and filed for divorce. The $550,000 house sat empty. The marble counters were covered in dust. The luxury man cave was silent. The grass grew long, and the paint began to peel. It was a monument to greed. It was a house that no one wanted and no one could use. I eventually sold my parcels, the driveway and the garden land, to a developer who wanted to build a small community. With that settlement money, I was able to walk away with a small fortune of my own. I had my dignity. I had my peace. And James had nothing but a pile of legal papers and a broken heart. 1 year later, I was sitting on the front porch of my new home. It is a beautiful, small cottage on the edge of a quiet lake. It is much smaller than the old house, but it is perfect. It is filled with the things I love. I have my books. I have Martha's old quilts. And I have a small woodworking shop in the back. I was sipping a glass of iced tea, watching the sun set over the water, when a beat-up old car pulled into my gravel drive. It was a car that looked like it belonged in a junkyard. The engine was rattling, and one of the fenders was held on by duct tape. A man climbed out of the car. He moved slowly, like someone who was carrying a heavy weight. His clothes were wrinkled and stained. His hair was long and unkempt. It took me a moment to realize that this was my son. This was James. He walked up to the porch steps but did not come up. He stood there, looking up at me with eyes that were hollow and red. "Hi, Dad," he whispered. His voice was cracked and thin. "Hello, James," I said. I did not get up. I did not move. I just looked at him. I heard you moved out here, he said, looking around at my beautiful cottage. It's a nice place. It looks peaceful. It is very peaceful, James, I replied. There is no noise, no corporate strategy, just the sound of the wind and the water. James looked down at his shoes. Everything is gone, Dad. Kimberly left me. The bank took the house. They sold it at auction for a fraction of what it was worth. I lost everything I put into it. The renovations, the furniture, everything. I did not say anything. I just waited. I am living in a shack, Dad, he said, his voice trembling. It's a small metal shed behind a warehouse where I found some part-time work. There is no heat. There is no insulation. It's cold, Dad. I'm so tired of being cold. He looked at me then, a single tear running down his face. I was wondering if you had an extra room. Just for a little while. I promise I won't get in the way. I can help with the yard. I can help with the wood shop. I just want to come home. I looked at the man who had stood in my kitchen and told me I was clutter. I looked at the man who had lied to me while I was blind from surgery. I looked at the man who had tried to optimize me out of my own life. I am sorry, James, I said. My voice was not angry. It was just final. But I have turned my extra room into a workshop. I spend my days building birdhouses and small furniture. It is a hobby move. It is about my own productivity and my own peace. James began to sob. Dad, please. It's me. It's your son. I know who you are, James, I said. And I remember who I was when I welcomed you into my home with open arms. I was a father who believed in family. But you taught me a very important lesson. You taught me that a roof is only as strong as the respect beneath it. You destroyed that foundation. You tore it down with your own hands. I stood up and walked to the door. I think you will find that your shack is much more suited to your current lifestyle, James. It matches the way you treated the person who loved you most. You wanted a man cave. Well, now you have one. Dad! He cried out as I reached for the handle. Good night, James, I said. I went inside and closed the door. I locked it, not out of fear, but out of finality. I walked into my kitchen and poured another glass of tea. I sat down and listened to the sound of his old car rattling back down the driveway. I felt at peace. I realized that some lessons can only be learned in the cold. Some people only understand the value of a home when they are standing outside in the dark. I have my cottage. I have my memories of Martha. And I have the respect for myself that I fought to keep. James had a front row seat to the consequences of his own greed. And as for me, I finally have the quiet life I worked 32 years to earn. As I sit here today, looking out at the calm water of the lake, I am struck by a simple truth. A house is nothing more than wood, nails, and shingles. It can be bought, it can be sold, and as I learned the hard way, it can even be stolen. But a home? A home is built on something much deeper. It is built on the trust between a father and a son. It is built on the respect for the 32 years of hard work that went into every single brick. When James and Kimberly decided to value a luxury man cave over my dignity, they did not just take my bedroom. They destroyed the very foundation of what makes a place a home. They thought they were being smart business people. They thought they were optimizing their lives. But you cannot optimize a father's love. You cannot put a price tag on a lifetime of sacrifice. My son wanted to be a winner in business, but he ended up losing the only person who would have given him everything for free. I share this with you today as a reminder. We live in a world that often moves too fast. People sometimes forget that the most valuable things we own are not listed on a property deed. They are the bonds we keep and the respect we show to our elders. James wanted a man cave, and in the end, he got exactly what he deserved. He got a front row seat to the consequences of his own greed. Please note, although this story was created to be engaging and easy to follow, the message it carries is very real. The names and specific details may be fictional, but the lessons about property rights, family respect, and the law of consequences are valuable for everyone to hear. It is a reminder to always be careful with what you sign and to never let anyone trample on your self-worth. If you enjoyed this journey and believe that what goes around truly comes around, please like this video. Your support helps us share these important lessons with more people across the country. And if you have ever had to stand up for yourself in a difficult situation, I would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Please subscribe to Elderly Stories for more tales of justice and life lessons from the heart. Thank you for spending your time with me today. May you always find peace and respect under your own roof. God bless.